So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Josie Clark for our presentation.
Thanks, Danny. You can go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll just dive right in. I'm going to start by talking about what a community impacts mitigation plan is. It describes the potential impacts to surrounding communities during cleanup, and the scope of this is really just the duration of active construction. So when we're capping and dredging and managing the associated materials, that's what this impacts mitigation plan covers. And it outlines the requirements and recommendations to implement during construction to lessen or mitigate community impacts. So that's what it is. It is going to impact our performing parties and their contractors because it will provide the requirements and guidelines for them to use during their construction. And it will also impact the Portland Harbor community because we're hoping it's the main document that folks turn to understand the accountabilities related to remedial action, what we're asking our performing parties to do, and what mitigations they need to put in place. So for those of you who've been around Superfund for a long time, you know that we always work to mitigate the impacts of our construction projects. But in the past, those requirements have been sprinkled through various documents. And so it wasn't always clear to community how those impacts were being mitigated. So a community impacts mitigation plan is relatively new. It's an idea that came about a few years ago from EPA. And we're starting to see more and more of them. But the goal is that it puts all that information in one place and creates more transparency for community. And then it also creates more transparency for our performing parties. Next slide. We've been at this for a while, as has been mentioned tonight. And it's gone through a number of iterations. We've gotten a lot of really important feedback from people along the way. So we started in 2022 with an open-ended question to community and to our performing parties and our fellow regulator agencies about what impacts we should be addressing. What should we be thinking forward to? You can see the bottom boxes are all the many organizations who've provided feedback so far, as well as individual community members. And we're hoping this box continues to grow with this next draft SIMP. So in 2022, we started getting ideas, digested, had a lot of conversation with folks. We came out with an annotated outline in late 2023, got feedback on that, generated an early draft SIMP that we went back and consulted with some folks who'd provided key information on and used their review to come up with the draft SIMP that we distributed last week. So from here, we're going to take public feedback for 60 days. We're looking forward for all these people to review what's in the plan now and give us even more feedback. And we'll take that and revise the draft one more time and come out with a quasi-final version in late 2024 or early 2025. And I say quasi because really we're going to continue to learn on this project. I think this plan will continue to grow as we learn more, but we'll come up with what we produce at the end of this year. I believe will take us through the beginning of construction. Next slide. Why have a SIMP? And as I mentioned before, it was often hard to tell previously exactly what was being done on Superfund sites to mitigate impacts to its community. So that's really the main reason. But it does all these other things as well. It's going to promote environmental justice with that transparency. It reduces impacts to potentially overburdened and underserved communities. Provides recommended practices that have the potential to benefit the local community and ensure meaningful public involvement. It informs remedial action monitoring plans, which measure community impact. So that's something that the performing parties will do monitoring as part of their construction. And this community impacts mitigation plan gives them goalposts to hit with that monitoring. And it sets expectations for operational decisions during construction. In our conversations in 2022, we came up with quite a healthy list of impacts. So these are all things that are addressed in their own section in the Community Impacts Mitigation Plan. So it is a long document. For those of you who haven't peeked at it yet, spoiler alert, there's a lot in there. But hopefully it will address the concerns of the community. Next slide. Oh, I didn't say next slide. Here, I'll let you linger on this for a minute. I've got my own set of cheat slides that I'm going off of. So sorry, everybody. Here's everything that has a section in chapter 4. So you can pick and these are also our breakout rooms after the meeting for feedback are going to be based on these issues. So if you have a particular issue you definitely want to talk about, track that for our breakouts after the meeting. All right, next slide. One of the foundational concepts that's woven in and out of our CIMP is remedial action requirements and remedial action recommendations. And remedial action requirements are quantifiable metrics or required actions that we identified that are going to guide the construction. These often come from federal and state laws that were identified in the record of decision, and so they need to be followed when we're conducting the cleanup. An example of this is fugitive dust emissions. So the record of decision that was signed in 2017 required us to follow Oregon Revised Statute 4680A, which is their air pollution statute. And specifically, that prohibits visible dust from leaving work sites. And the cleanup has to comply with that law. Therefore, our fugitive dust emission standard is that there will be no visible dust leaving the work site. We also have remedial action recommendations. So these are actions that performing parties and their contractors or EPA can implement to minimize the community impacts of construction work at Portland Harbor. So the difference here is that they're not required, they are recommended. And often these recommendations work in concert with existing programs or channels of communication. And the example I'll use here is recreation. So we know that some of our work will impact some recreation in the harbor, but there's not a requirement around it. But there are things we can do to mitigate the impacts, right? And it has to do with communication, to making sure that we are in close communication with Portland Parks and the Oregon Marine Board to ensure that those existing communication channels alert people doing in-water recreation to those activities. Another one is that performing parties should minimize barriers to ongoing use of public parks. And so this may include configuring construction equipment to keep pathways clear, would be an example of that recommendation playing out. All right, next slide. One of the big changes we made between getting feedback on the annotated outline and what you'll see in this draft is we added a whole new section on communications. Chapter 3 of the CIMP outlines the communications transparency and how modifications to the SIMP will be made. One of the two main features of that are we're going to stand up the Portland Harbor Complaint and Information Hotline and a Community Impacts Mitigation Plan Implementation Committee. So that hotline will run for the duration of construction, and it will give people a way to ask questions and a way to get a response from. It'll be kind of jointly managed between EPA, the performing parties, and the folks doing the construction work. This is an area that we got a lot of really good feedback from, so I just want to shout out, especially the City of Portland and Pacificor gave us some really good ideas and feedback on this section. Next slide, which is also my last slide, to talk a little bit more about our SIMP Implementation Committee. The idea of this is that it'll be EPA will convene it, and we will get folks in the room who are the ones actually doing the construction work in that coming season, some of the regulatory agencies, tribal representatives, community members who are especially interested and engaged in the construction project, and also the navigation safety folks, so U.S. Coast Guard, Oregon Marine Board, the Harbor Master. This is a group that will meet a few times a year and look at what's happening in the upcoming work windows. They really understand what's going on with construction. They can provide feedback on requirements and recommendations and how those are working out. We will share with that group what we're hearing from the complaint line, with the information and complaint line. Hopefully we got some questions for information also. But that's a place where we can look at trends and potentially tweak our operations in future mobilizations. This isn't the channel to do immediate, like, if, oh, your light is shining in my house, that needs to be solved immediately with the contractor in the field. But this is more kind of, in general, we're hearing concerns about who knows what it is generally, and then we can pivot to address that concern in future mobilizations. As we grow on the project, as we start doing construction work, we are going to learn things, and we are probably going to want to modify the CIMP, and this group will be a clearinghouse for those modifications. And we imagine this group will present updates to the Portland Harbor Collaborative Group about how construction's going. And as everything, this group also may evolve from its initial structure and function as we get going. This is how we think. This is our idea for how to start out, and we will continue to keep an open mind to improving our process as we go along. Next slide. So a quick thank you to everyone who's given all their time and expertise to this plan so far. It wouldn't have been possible for us to get this far without all of that robust engagement. So I just really appreciate everything we've gotten so far, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody's feedback on how this draft is looking and what we can do to improve it.
And we wanted to mention too, just that the Portland Harbor Community Coalition, they've helped convene, some different groups and brought other people in too throughout the last couple of years for that community feedback as well, like early on. But right now is the time when anyone and everyone to look at it again. We're going to be going to the neighborhood associations to work on letting everyone know about this. So some of you I know are on for the neighborhood associations. I know Linton is on our list, and Dries helped get us on that one. So just want to mention that as some of our upcoming outreach too.
Great. Thank you so much, Josie and Laura, for that presentation and information on the SIMP. Additionally, we're going to have some breakout rooms following this meeting, starting at 7:15 and going to 8 o'clock, where folks will be able to ask questions or provide feedback on the impacts that are talked about in the Community Impacts Mitigation Plan. So those will be all the things in Chapter 4 and the thing that you saw on that slide with the icons in Josie's presentation. But for now, we have some additional time to go over any questions that you have on Josie's presentation or on the SIMP generally. So I'll go ahead and open the floor for the questions and answers section.